for registering and attending our second Business Matter Chats. We're not able to offer these programs without our loyal membership and our generous members, so I want to thank you all. As a reminder, we also welcome your participation with questions following our speakers' remarks today. Today, we are pleased to introduce State Representative Robin Voss, who represents the 63rd Assembly District in Racine County and is the 75th Speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly. Many of you may not know, he's also a small business owner here in southeastern Wisconsin. Robin was first elected in 2004 and is serving his 7th term in the Assembly. He's also the current president of the National Conference of State Legislatures, the premier bipartisan organization serving the nation's state legislators and staff. So with that, good afternoon. I'll turn it over to you, Speaker Voss.
Thank you very much, Matt. Well, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for taking a little time out of your day to talk about some of the issues that we're all facing as business owners and folks who are involved in our economy. Just a couple minutes on what I think has been happening and some of my background and how I believe it kind of colors the world that we're living in and the way that we deal with the situations going forward. So as Matt said, born and raised in Racine County. Many of you know I was on the county board for about 10 years before I got elected to the Assembly. So my passion has always been in local government. State government is pretty much an extension or vice versa. Local governments are really an extension of state government. So a lot of the issues are similar. As we look at what's been happening, I have to tell you, when I ran for office the first time for the Assembly, there are a lot of things that were in my I never thought I'd have to deal with box. One is a world that is awash with the pandemic. That is a challenge that all of us have had to face. I didn't know most of these terms, as I'm sure most of you didn't 6 months ago. And now I feel like almost everybody has their Facebook epidemiology degree. So it seems like everybody has opinions, and there are a lot of facts out there that we choose to either listen to or not based on where people are. And that's part of the challenge. That is the second thing I never thought I'd really have to face. And that is the incredible level of hyperpartisanship that's in our society. It is really challenging as a business person. I always say to folks, I want to make sure whoever wants to buy my product, I don't care what your party is, where you're from, as long as we can strike an honest deal, that's good for both of us. That's a win in our capitalist system. So when I bought my company in 1996, I started with a couple employees. Today we have about 75, and we are in need of more folks. But it's interesting because in this world that we are living in, I think most of us agree that the problems are somewhat similar. We have to figure out how we deal with the virus. We have to do it safely, but we also have to make sure that we keep our system going and that we don't create a huge level of dependency on government in a way that, of course, our future citizens and our children can't afford. The second thing is we have to make sure our economy keeps growing so that we have hopefully a better business climate, rising wages, the ability for everybody to earn more and keep more of what they earn, and do it in a way that allows them to have a prosperous life that's fulfilling and hopefully satisfying for them and their family. And the third thing I think we all agree on is that there's an appropriate role for government. As a Republican, of course, I want one that's much more limited. My friends on the Democratic side want one that's much more expansive. But that's where I feel like the common ground and the ability to have a rational discussion sometimes seems to fall apart in the political world of today, where it's a whole lot of finger pointing and yelling and all the things that really, to me, don't seem like they achieve much of a purpose. So I prided myself on trying to be a good listener. I try the very best that I can to talk about the topics that I know people want us to focus on and see if we can find solutions. So the good news for Wisconsin is that we're actually in a fairly good place in a number of metrics. On our budget, which is the thing that the state legislature spends most of its time on. Because of some of the hard decisions that we made in the last budget, we were able to pass a bipartisan budget where Republicans in the legislature voted yes, every Democrat voted no, but then ultimately Governor Evers signed it. It put more money in public schools, more money in hospitals and long-term care, all at the same time while cutting income taxes for every single person listening on this Zoom call. We then went and focused on a lot of other priorities. We did a task force on suicide prevention. We did another one on water quality. We did another one on enhancing the workforce. So we've been doing a lot of really good work. I thought we would come back in the spring with a lot of things that we could pass and be proud of. We did that in the state assembly, but then the pandemic hit and we kind of ground to a halt where the state Senate has over 100 bills that we have passed that they didn't yet get a chance to act on. But we paused, took a look around to say, how do we fight the virus? And again, in a bipartisan fashion, Democrats and Republicans, I think there were only 2 no votes in the entire legislature, passed a package that I authored in April, which extended unemployment, made it easier to get your license. I think it was over 50 different items that we passed to allow folks to deal with the pandemic and hopefully do it in a way that made it easier to deal with government, not more difficult. We, of course, then have had our series of challenges. We went through this time where, of course, we saw what happened in Minneapolis with the situation with Mr. Floyd. Of course, tragically, we saw what happened in Kenosha, where, of course, it was a very, very difficult situation. I don't think state government made it better. But again, only time will tell, and we'll see what happens out of that situation. And here we sit today, getting ready to move forward and hopefully focus on what do we deal with the world after the virus. It's interesting because some of the things that the virus has laid bare really are things that we should focus on fixing no matter whether the pandemic was there, but it was just a really good example of things that we can do better. Government is far too slow and far too unresponsive. When you have a huge slug of people applying for unemployment insurance with the vast majority of people never having done it before, of course there were going to be delays, and of course there were going to be people who were frustrated. That is expected when you have literally upwards of 1 million people looking to get benefits that hadn't ever done it before, or the vast majority hadn't done it before. So we are now 6 months in almost, and unfortunately some of those people, a large number, thousands of people, still don't have answers. That is a symptom of a government that's not responsive, and one that needs to have some serious systematic reform as to how we get people back to work, and when they're temporarily unemployed, make sure they get the benefits they need. Second thing that it really laid bare is that the way we do our worker training and the way that we get people into the pipeline sure has a lot of improvement. What's frustrating to me is even in my own business, as we saw upwards of 10% unemployment, and I think today it's still between 6 and 7%, there are still almost every business person that I find says they have jobs that go wanting, and they put out help wanted ads, and people say they'll be there, don't show up. Staff come in and then leave because they know that they're in such dire demand for labor, they can basically come and go at will, and a lot of people won't get fired. So we have got to create a situation that's much more accountable to say, if you want to work, we want to help you. But if you don't want to work, we need to figure out why and get you back into the world of work, not into the world of collecting benefits. And that's where I think we've made it a little bit too easy in some ways. And then the third thing we really need to focus on is how do we do a better job with education? One of the bills that I was proud to author, it passed under Governor Walker, was a program that created grants for every single high school student, both in public and private schools, where if a school district agreed to provide a laptop or an electronic device to every single every single student in a grade, the state of Wisconsin gave a grant for up to half of the cost, because we knew going forward the world had to be much more connected than it is now. We also gave grants for hotspots because we wanted every single child in the state to have access to the internet, because we all know that's the future, and we've got to do a better job. Unfortunately, Governor Evers vetoed that program in the last budget. So all the money just went into the general pot and went out to school districts for them to spend as they chose. In general, I believe in local control, but this is one where we needed to give that extra push to school districts to say, we need you to get kids using technology, make sure that kids who don't have access to the internet certainly have hotspots so they can do their homework and stay connected to class. Well, now the pandemic has laid bare that we've still got that issue all across the state, especially in rural parts of Wisconsin. Even where I live, I don't have high-speed internet that's on a wired line. I have a mobile hotspot. So I think for a lot of Wisconsin, access to the internet and making sure we have good broadband connections should be something else we already were focusing on. We could do a better job. So I think those are areas between workers, making sure we have people ready to work, making sure that we have access to the benefits people need, but not for the long term, and then ultimately access to broadband should be things that we can come back after the elections when we focus again on policy and not politics, and have the opportunity to discuss, hopefully in a bipartisan fashion, to get things done where the legislature passes them and they're signed by Governor Evers. So with that, Matt, I'd be happy to turn it over to folks. If you have some questions, happy to take it on any topic.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Anna to ask you some questions.
Sure.
But based on some of the things that you said, the first thing that pops into mind is really, do you ever see both sides of the aisle being able to work together again today? Because things are so polarized, whether it's locally or throughout the, in Washington, throughout the United States. Do you ever see this coming to a middle ground again?
Well, it's a challenge. So I will say that the way the world works versus the way people perceive the world to work are different. So at least in the state legislature, I can't speak for Congress or anywhere else. Since I became speaker in 2013, I think it's 91.5% of all the bills that became law or that passed our chamber had bipartisan support. So 9 out of 10 bills have support from Republicans and Democrats. But if you're in the media, those usually aren't as interesting to report on as the 10% or the 1 out of 10, where there were a Republican said this and a Democrat said that. I believe this and he believes that. So I think part of it is just the world that we live in versus the reality that I get to see. But I will say on certain areas, I pride myself. I try really, really hard not to make my job personal. Where, look, I don't agree a lot with Greta Neubauer or Tip McGuire or Bob Wirch, but I think they're good, decent people who have a different vision of what the world should look like than I do. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that we're different. Unfortunately, in politics today, some people can't accept that people just have a different idea. And it doesn't mean that we don't both love schools or love the environment or care about racial justice, whatever the topic would be. They kind of try to demonize the other side. And I'm not saying that's just Democrats. Unfortunately, I think it's people on both sides that do that. I've just chosen not to try to buy into that as much as I am able because I want to find those solutions. So it's not easy. I think the world is much more polarized, and frankly, it's because of social media, where everybody thinks they're an expert and everybody thinks that they have the right to call people names that you would never do to somebody, or at least you shouldn't do in person. And that makes it much more caustic. So I've done something different. Most people who contact my office, my staff gets their phone number and I call them back personally. I do that every week. I have a call list where I call through. And it's funny because some people are still mad, but the vast majority of people, even those who were rude in email or had a snide remark, when you call them on the phone and have to have a real conversation, most people back down and they realize that if you want to get something done, you got to listen to the other side too. So I guess at certain times in American history, it's been positive and negative, super intense, more in the middle. We're just in one of those super intense times. So my hope is that we kind of gradually go back down where I don't agree necessarily with what some people think, but I don't have to say that they're a bad person simply because I disagree.
Great. I'll throw it back to Anna. I know she's got some questions here.
Sure.
Yes, so as a reminder for everyone, just because it's a larger group, use that chat box if a question comes to mind, and I'll kind of moderate that chat box. So please utilize that. But I do have some people that sent some questions in advance. So kind of on partially what you were just speaking of, how you're only even at the Capitol once a week. This question came in a couple days ago. When is the next legislative session, and what topics do you expect will come up in that session?
Sure. So the way the Wisconsin legislature works is slightly different than the way Congress works. So Congress basically goes in all year long. They have a month session, they leave for a month or two, they have a month session. That's the way they work it. The Wisconsin legislature under Democrats, Republicans, Governor Walker, Governor Doyle, Governor Earl, all the way back to the 1980s, normally does a session where we come in for 6 months. We then break for the summer. We come in for the fall and for a couple months in the spring. We then break to begin the campaign cycle. So we try to not mix politics and policy as much as we are able. This year, because of the pandemic, we came back probably the latest that I think we have in a long time, and that was coming back in April. Then we break off and we are back going forward with kind of the traditional political cycle. So committees are still meeting, folks are still talking. So we know there are some important topics people would like us to discuss. One of those is a topic that I know Governor Evers had a whole package of bills that he announced in the summer, unfortunately with no discussion, no bipartisan talks on gun control and on what we could do reducing, in his mind, violence. Those bills, of course, we looked at them and they'll come up in the next legislative session, just like everyone potentially could. We saw what happened in Kenosha, and he just basically took the same bills he introduced before and said, let's bring those forward. Some of them are clearly ones I don't support because they're kind of, I won't say anti-police, but they're certainly not pro-police. So I want to make sure we find a balance between helping folks who have been victims, but also making sure that we protect the men and women who serve us as people in law enforcement. So we formed a task force where a Democrat and a Republican, bipartisan, are agreeing to do a task force dealing with some of these issues. It's going to be in workforce development and education, along with some of our racial discrepancies, especially among the way that policing happens. So we are meeting. We've had over 100 people volunteer to be part of that, which is fantastic from the private sector. They will begin to do their work over the course of the next 2 to 4 weeks, and then we'll have hearings. We'll go through the process, and when we get sworn in January, my goal is to have bills on that package ready to pass by Black History Month, which would be in February. So pretty much our process goes through. We have 41 days, I think, until the election. So for us, nothing will happen until after the election, but things are happening behind the scenes to get us ready for January.
Thank you. Nice little government lesson there. Another question, I know actually 2 or 3 people have asked this, is going straight to COVID-19, any litigation. I know that there was a lot of letters sent. I know we as a chamber sent letters to all our representatives about the protecting businesses from frivolous lawsuits or that business liability protection. So is there a status on that or anything you can talk to about that?
Sure. So that was one of the things that early on in the year, I asked Governor Evers if he would be open to having us work on that, and he did not signal a great deal of interest, unfortunately. So I took it upon myself to reach out to the trial lawyers, not traditionally a Republican group. I mean, they have Republican trial lawyers, just like there are Democrat business owners, so you don't want to stereotype, but a little bit more on the liberal side. And I have said to them, geez, could we find a way to have the trial lawyers sit down with us, see if we can bring in the business community and try to find a middle ground? Maybe not everything the business community would want and not anything that the trial lawyers might support, but see where the middle ground really was. So we took about 2 months and kind of went back and forth to try to see if there was middle ground. And let me tell you, Anna, it was very hard because there are things that I fundamentally believe in. I think that it is challenging for me to see situations where a business who simply opens their doors and says, I'm going to allow customers to come in, should ever be liable if someone gets COVID while they are shopping at their store or where they are working in their business, because there's no way to know for sure where someone is exposed. And that's why I think that lawsuits are unlikely to occur in any great degree. But we also know that in the litigious world that we are in, it certainly doesn't surprise me if somebody tries to do that and just make a quick buck off, sue and settle. So my hope is that we can still find that middle ground, because the legislature can pass the best bill we ever want. And if it were me and I get to be king for a day, of course, that's what I would do. But knowing we have Governor Evers who has to sign the bill, if it doesn't have the support of both sides, or at least the begrudging support or less opposition, let's put it that way, of both sides, we're certainly not going to get anything actually to become law. So my hope is that we can bring an idea forward. We'll keep working on that. We've already had some of those discussions to continue to get ready for January, but it's very challenging when you have 2 sides who really have diametrically opposing views.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as Anna said, we sent some letters out to our representatives. RAMAC really wants to see this get done, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. We need to protect our businesses, and we need to figure out how to get that done. So if we can be of further assistance in that in any way, please let me know, but we need to get that done.
I appreciate that. I agree with you. And it's not just businesses. I mean, even the county fair, as an example, the county fair did not go forward because they were afraid of getting sued.
Right.
So it's a whole lot. It's nonprofits, it's schools, it's local governments. It's all kinds of people who have that fear that we need to figure out how we live with the virus, because, you know, God willing, there's a vaccine in the spring. We still have to figure out how to get to where that is widely available and widely utilized.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I don't want to just, it's not all COVID, okay, but I'll stay with that topic. So the governor has extended the mask order for about another 60 days, I believe, November 21st. And is there any recourse the legislature has to engage with the governor on this one-size-fits-all policy?
Yeah, well, you probably read the Journal Times today. I am not a big supporter of the governor's actions. But we really have a difficult situation, because You know, the governor, he is probably one of the poorest communicators of any elected official I have ever met. The ability to reach out, to have a conversation, to see if there's any kind of middle ground, that's just not in his DNA. The way that I found out about his second executive order, he called me like 60 minutes before he released it. And the way those conversations go is he says, this is what I'm going to do. I say, well, geez, I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it. Well, that's what I'm doing. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, that's the way it is. I mean, that's the way he communicates. Well, that's not how two people try to find common ground, right? By saying, this is it. If you don't like it, tough luck. So as far as the mask mandate, I certainly think we already know under the Safer at Home order where the legislature went and sued because the governor clearly has one bite at the apple. He has the ability to say for 60 days, we're going to do things that are outside of the norm. The legislature has the right to repeal that during the 60 days, but if it goes beyond 60 days, it has to be done through an affirmative vote of the legislature. There's nothing for us to repeal because he has to issue an order that's not on the same topic. It's very clear. The Supreme Court found that. That's why he couldn't do a second Safer at Home order in May. So the law to me seems pretty crystal clear. So having us go in and do kind of a repeal vote on something that was done illegally, that is basically justifying the second action where he can then come in the third day and do a new one, and we can come in the fourth day and repeal it, and he can come in the fifth day and put a new one in. So we need the court to step in and say, look, just like we did during the Safer at Home order, you get one chance, and then after that you have to work with other branches of government. You don't get to be a dictator. So I assume this week we'll be involved in the lawsuit that is going forward, just like we were in May on the Safer at Home order. Because while I certainly think people should follow the CDC guidelines, I think it makes sense in a lot of cases for folks to wear a mask. I trust people to make their own decisions and businesses to do the same. I don't think we need a one-size-fits-all mandate that says everybody, regardless of your background, what kind of business you're in, has to follow the exact same rules when those are certainly not all agreed upon by even medical experts.
Yes, hot topic. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's not gonna end anytime soon. So hang in there, everybody.
One more issue.
Yeah. I'm gonna completely flip us on our heads and go a different route. So a while ago, there was, I believe, Governor Walker and you as well turned down federal funding for commuter rail between, the KRM thing, Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, even Madison. What is there? The exact question, I will read the exact question. Why did you reject that great opportunity for talent, housing, growth, and modern living in this district?
Sure. Well, my gosh, that was so long ago. So in 2010, Governor Walker ran for election saying that he would not accept the federal dollars to connect Milwaukee to Minneapolis with a high-speed train. So that is totally different than what KRM was, which is really a commuter train from, of course, Kenosha to Chicago. So that is a different topic. But on the first item, where we had the Talgo contract, that would have been a pretty massive subsidy that was required, and that's why Governor Walker canceled the contract, and we do not have that high-speed rail. On the topic that we had with KRM, again, that was back, when I first got elected in 2006, 7, 8, somewhere in there. Even the Democrats at the time did not support a sales tax to subsidize KRM, because we know that there is no transportation system that utilizes any kind of fixed rail that does not require a fairly substantial subsidy from somebody to operate. It's why even in Milwaukee, where they have the HOP, or whatever you want to call it, with the Potawatomi, it requires a massive subsidy from them. Now, with their financial situation, I don't know if they're going to keep doing that, but I think that's because we know in the world that we're living in, with people being so mobile, having fixed routes isn't always the most predictable. I mean, who would have ever guessed if we would have put KRM in, that few people would be commuting to work because more of them are working from home. So there is no magic answer. And that's why I think even Democrats at the time rejected the idea of this big tax increase to fund KRM.
Great. We have a question in the chat box about child care access. So I'll just read it exactly so that I don't screw it up. What are next steps for the state to address child care access and affordability, an issue for both businesses that employ parents as well as children. So next steps for the state to address childcare access.
Boy, what a hot topic in so many ways. Just like I think if you would have asked people 6 months ago if they could ever imagine a time where they would become their child's teacher, we are seeing that the world is just changing so fast it's hard for us to keep up. So we know that even in districts like Racine Unified, and I have not gotten the stats yet, I've asked my staff to pull those, but I don't know where they are. We saw Unified took credit in saying that 14,000 connections occurred in Racine Unified where kids had the ability to virtually learn. But we also know that their enrollment was significantly more than that, with the number of kids who had the ability to not access the internet or were not part of the system. So I think the world of caring for kids is changing in general between those who are still going to work in the future at a distant location and need a place for their kids to be taken care of, and people who will end up working from home who need to figure out a methodology now to make sure that their kids have a great education, not necessarily sitting next to them while they work. So I think we're going to have a complete discussion of what the world of work looks like for parents going forward after the pandemic, frankly, because we don't want to change our entire way of living if we assume that this is a once in a generation type event. But at the same time, we want to be prepared. So if parents have to do some kind of remote learning, that we have a better answer than we do for kids right now. So childcare is really tough because we want the best paid, the best qualified childcare folks, but we also have to make it affordable for people to be able to work and still afford quality childcare. So no easy answer. I know Wisconsin's been a leader. Of course, we have the system where we rate childcare centers. We have subsidies for those folks who are of modest means that work to be able to get subsidized childcare. So I think we have done a lot of good things, but I also think we need to take the pandemic and put that into account as we move forward. So open to new ideas. If folks have any, please feel free to contact me, but that's going to be a topic that's going to have to seriously be discussed as we figure out how many work from home and how many work from a distant location.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot about, you're right, it's a hot topic. I've heard a lot about it. I don't know if this is controversial. I'm going to be honest, I don't know anything about it. So I'm just going to read the question exact as is, and then I will learn something. Will Representative David Owen be censored for his participation in social unrest / rioting? Question mark?
Yep. So in my mind, he should be. I think that's one of the challenges that we have, that the legislature has limited ability to do anything like that. So again, not taking any actions till we return in January. That's our normal process. So what we would normally do is we would normally form an ethics committee where it is an even number of Republicans and Democrats to look at what happened and how it would move forward. My fear is that because of the hyper-political world that we are in, it will just end up being Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other, and nothing occurs. So what I would hope for is that his constituents, first of all, stand up and say, this is unacceptable. Of course, people have every right to participate in peaceful protests. I encourage that if people feel like that's the way to have their voice heard, as long as they are peaceful. But what we saw in Milwaukee, what we saw in Wauwatosa, what we saw in Kenosha were embarrassments for our state. People becoming violent. I talked to an officer just yesterday as I was out campaigning, talking about how he had bricks thrown at him in Kenosha, a Molotov cocktail, people who took propane tanks and lit them on fire and threw them. I mean, just things that you would never, ever imagine that folks would want to do in a place like Wisconsin that we all know and love. So from my perspective, he should be embarrassed with what he did, especially lying about it, which is what to me is worse. If you do something, own it. Accept it. We're all adults and you are judged on your actions and how you respond to them afterward. The fact that he lied about it and called someone else's character into question to help his own is what's upset me the most. So we'll take a look at that in January. We'll certainly see if there's the potential to have a process that works, but knowing that by law, it has to be equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats, I fear that it wouldn't necessarily accomplish very much, but certainly open to looking at it.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna lie, I didn't know much about it, so I'm gonna have to look that up.
Sure.
Will, kind of along those lines, will the legislature formally make a statement in support of police statewide at all, do you think?
We've done that, and I've tried to be as supportive as I could. One of the things that was most disappointing, because I am just like many of the people on the phone here. I am an observer. I am certainly not an expert. I've done ride-alongs with police officers, and I know how incredibly brave the men and women are who choose to wear a badge, and I have the utmost respect for them. I know how threatening it must be when you are walking up to a car in the dark and have no idea what's inside there, to be calm and cool and collected, and they are exceptional. Their training is really good. But I also know that when people make a mistake, and people do make mistakes, all of us have in our lives, you do in your professional career, there's a price to be paid, and that there's a process. So I feel bad for the officer in Kenosha who was prejudged by Governor Evers based on a single video that we have no idea if that told the entire story. It was one angle, one clip. We don't know all the back and forth that occurred beforehand or after. So that's why I've said I'm not going to prejudge the officer until there's an actual discussion by experts who understand it all. So that's what's disappointing to me, is that people are prejudging someone not knowing whether or not they have all the facts. So I don't want to do that either. I think that's wrong. So yes, couldn't be more supportive of police. Want to do everything I can to be making sure we will never, as long as I have a say about it, reduce funding for police. I think that's the wrong move when so many of them need our support and encouragement. And in many places, we need more police officers, not less. That's why I was deeply disappointed that Mayor Barrett, in what I would say is just another calculated political move, reduce the number of police in Milwaukee. Like, that's the last thing Milwaukee needs, is to be less safe than it is right now. I would say the same thing about Racine or Kenosha or anywhere else. We want to have at least the same police presence, if not more. So I say it every day. I've said it publicly, and I hope others will join me by saying that being pro-police shouldn't be a partisan issue. Unfortunately, it seems like it's become one, and that, again, just shows this hyper-partisan divide that should not be there. We should all support the police, and if someone is guilty, we should also all support their being prosecuted for committing a crime if they did, but certainly not prejudging them until we've made sure that all the facts are on the table.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Matt, I think, had a question.
Yes, there's a question that came in. How is the state going to deal with the election and getting the votes counted on time? What does that look like?
Yeah, so Wisconsin has very crystal clear statutes that frustrate me when people want to try to change the rules because they think it benefits their side of the equation. So we have a voter ID law that's been in place now for, I think it's 4 or 5 years. Very few issues. The vast majority of Wisconsinites have no problem with it. We've gone through presidential elections, gubernatorial elections. Democrats have won, Republicans have won. It's a fair system. We know we have the ability to vote early. Wisconsinites, we passed legislation that said, here's the amount of time you can vote early. It's 2 weeks beforehand. You have the ability to cast a ballot 2 weeks beforehand in person on election day, and then we count them that night with the goal of knowing sometime that evening or early the next morning who the winner of any election is. That's the way we've always done it, and that's what I think we should stick with. Unfortunately, because Democrats want to try to rig the system to help themselves, they sued in court. We had a judge in Madison make some decisions that extended how long people could get their ballots in. So you could literally mail it on election day, and we'd have to wait until Monday to know who the winner of the election was. I think that would be crazy. We have more than enough notice. People are voting already now absentee. You can go on election day. You can go early to the clerk the couple weeks beforehand. You should be able to get your ballot in by election day. That's part of the responsibility of being a citizen. You can drop it off on election day. So having to say I'm going to put it in the mail on election day as opposed to just dropping it off at my polling place seems to be absurd. So I'm sure there's a lawsuit that's moving its way forward. I am certain we will end up appealing that to say that the ballots have to be cast by election day, counted on election day, just like we have occurred in the past. Because I want to ensure that we know who the winners are and people do not undermine the process by thinking something sinister is happening between election day and that Monday following.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So along those lines, why are the municipalities not allowed to start counting their ballots early, the ones that have come in?
Yep, so we passed that legislation in the Assembly. It's one of the 100 bills that's kind of stalled in the state Senate. I have no problem if people want to put it inside the voting machine. So we just have to be very careful that a nefarious clerk wouldn't push the button to say, geez, I wonder how the early votes are looking, and then tell one side or the other, hey, Trump's doing great or Biden's doing great, to try to influence how the turnout would be. That's the fear. I think that's a very small chance that would occur. So I think it's a lot of potential for how you can do it. Now, Many of you know I worked the polls in Burlington in April. And what they did there with so many absentee ballots is they literally had dozens of volunteers who would walk through the line, making sure the person signed the ballot, and they would literally be a voter, and they would just go through the line. So by the end of the day, all the absentee votes were cast, and they were able to do it on election day. So I think there is a process if the clerk is organized and has a system to put into place. In the village of Rochester, they go through before election day and they validate every single ballot ready to be counted. So yes, it's a valid voter in the village. Yes, they have not yet cast a ballot. Yes, there's a witness signature. And they go through that whole process. And they also have a speedy way to go through on election day to do it. Sometimes I feel like the disorganization of some municipalities leads to having these problems rise up where there are solutions that are already legal on the books versus the way that people choose to say they have to operate, which isn't necessarily true. So certainly open to counting them early as long as they're done safely, that nobody can cheat. But under our current system, I also think it's probably going to work just fine as long as we get creative and use the existing statutes to solve it, as opposed to just throw up our hands and say, well, I can't do anything until 8 o'clock on election night. That's just not true.
So we're trying to keep these just to about 45 minutes. So people, it gets a little hard looking at a computer for that long, especially like my day today. I've been on it all day. So I am going to have one more question here, just kind of a general one. And then we should be able to wrap it up with some closing comments from Matt. So can you give us an election preview specifically on the legislative level?
Sure. So 99 districts in Wisconsin. Each person represents about 58,000 people. Some districts will have turnout of 6,000 to 8,000 voters. Some districts will have over 30,000. So it just depends on the part of the state that you live in and the enthusiasm for what's going on in this election. Once every dozen years, the only race on the ballot is the president, members of Congress, and the legislature and county officials. So there's no gubernatorial or US Senate race. That changes the dynamic, which is why it's so, and at least in Wisconsin, so much is focused on the presidential race, because that's the big kahuna where most people are talking about it and focused with yard signs and door to door and phone calling and texting and all that. As you all know, Wisconsin is critically important for both parties, which is why we are getting way too much outside money coming in and spending. We see, I'm sure I watched the news last night, and every commercial or every other commercial is some kind of a political ad attacking this person or saying this person's great or sucks or whatever. So I'm already getting sick of it. I'm sure many of you are too. Texting starting to come in, mail is coming to the door. So we are at the intense political time. Wisconsin Republicans have always done really well going door to door safely. We've always done it in the past. We're doing it again this cycle. So I'm doing that myself. I'm going door to door. I take a mask with me. Of course, I socially distance, but I found a couple things. People want to talk longer than normal. They want to talk about what's going on. They worry about the country. They want to make sure that we have thought through some of our responses to the big issues we talked about earlier. I feel in our area, for the most part, we have got really competitive races with great candidates. But I don't really know what's going to happen on election day. I feel pretty confident that Republicans will keep control of both the state Senate and the state Assembly. I think we've got really good candidates that can appeal to both sides. For all the Democrat excuses why they don't win elections, they keep saying it's about gerrymandering, which is really goofy. So in 2018, a very big Democrat year, Tammy Baldwin won a wide election, statewide. She actually carried 18 districts where the Assembly Republican also won. So there are ticket splitters all across Wisconsin where people vote for a Democrat for the US Senate and a Republican for the state legislature. I think that's part of what Wisconsin is known for. So we have got good, strong candidates. I feel good about our chances. I think we'll come back and we'll hopefully get some stuff done. But people are already starting to talk about 2022 for the gubernatorial election, and that frustrates me. We should focus on 2020. Let's just focus on making sure we have good people elected and then go forward. So I hope if any of you live in my district, I can earn your vote. I'm proud to represent Racine County, and I hope I get the chance to do so again.
Okay, thank you for that. So like I said, to keep us kind of on track, there may have been a couple other questions that I that I missed, don't take it personally. Anyone out there, please. I'm sure you can, as Speaker Voss stated, I'm sure you can contact his office and he might just give you a phone call back.
Yep.
So
Why
kind
don't you live by
of
distance?
remember
Yep.
that. Yep,
Yep.
yep. And then Matt has some closing announcements to make, even though he's doing it behind a black screen. But I thank you all.
Anna, can I just say thank you? I appreciate all of you
absolutely.
taking some time this afternoon to ask me questions. And I do appreciate the fact that the business community is what is going to get us out of the situation that we are in. As a fellow business owner myself, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for giving people jobs. Thank you for the hard work you're doing to keep your businesses open and thriving and giving us as much normalcy as coronavirus will allow. So I appreciate it very much, and I hope you'll stay active. RAMAC does a great job. They always reach out to me. They are always on top of things, saying this is what we need. And if there was ever a time where you appreciated being part of an organization like RAMAC, it's 2020. They were on the front lines fighting to make sure that we were reopened. They were on the front lines making sure that businesses had access to the resources they needed. I know as the city has done some things, they've been at the forefront to try to find ways to balance it all out. So Matt and the staff at RAMAC, you guys are awesome. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate all the work you guys do.
Well, thank you so much. Certainly appreciate those kind words, and we're indebted to you for taking the time today to have the discussion, answer these questions. We truly do appreciate it. And we also appreciate that anytime we do reach out to you, you are very responsive. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Matt.
In closing, I just want to say that our next Business Matters chat, we will have State Representative from the 62nd Assembly District, Bob Whitkey, and that will be on Wednesday, October 21st, same time. We hope that you're able to join us. And just as a quick reminder, for these Business Matters chats, we are always looking for a sponsor of these programs. So if your business is interested in it, please get a hold of me. We would love to have you be the sponsor for these. And we thank you all for being a part of this today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.